For those of you tuning in online, my name is Rose O'Donovan and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the Brussels-based publication AgriFacts. And I will be moderating this session, taking over from my co-host Stephen Sacker until around 12:30 p.m. As we said earlier, we would like to make this as interactive and as inclusive as possible. So if you'd like to ask a question online, just scroll down to the page underneath the picture where I'm appearing, and you can enter your question there, and that will be transmitted to us on stage as earlier with Stephen. Questions from the audience here need to be put in English, and otherwise online you can also pose them in French. Also, feel free to join us on Twitter at Forum for Ag. So now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our guest speaker, Geneviève Pons, who will deliver a special address. Ms. Pons is Director General and Vice President of Europe Jacques Delors, based in Brussels. She brings a wealth of experience to this discussion, having previously served as a cabinet member in charge of environment and climate matters in Jacques Delors' cabinet when he was President of the European Commission. Geneviève is an honorary director of the European Commission and previously served as Director of Legal Services of the International Labour Organization and Director of the WWF's European Office. And if that isn't impressive enough, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Pons is a graduate of the Sorbonne, Sciences Po Paris, and the prestigious École Nationale d'Administration, ENA. Geneviève Pons, the floor is yours.
It's good to be back here after a few years and in person. So that's a great experience, even if the room is not as full as it used to be. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much first to the organizers of the forum for having invited me to speak here today. A few years ago, I came as the head of WWF. I mean WWF European Office, not international organization. And I see some of former colleagues in the room. Throughout my career, I have worked on environmental sustainability in different positions and from different angles, starting as a member of the cabinet of Commission President Jacques Delors, where I was notably in charge of preparing the UN Conference on Environment and Development of 1992 in Rio. Back from Rio, I contributed to what can be seen as the first Sustainable Development Agenda for Europe, Chapter 10 of the 1994 White Book on a New Development Model. You could read it with interest, and you would see that concepts like circular economy were already there, and that 26 years before the Green Deal, we aim for the right combination of social justice and the protection of natural resources. It is with this background that I look at the current discussions about the transformation of the European agriculture and food system. First of all, this transformation is necessary. The data speak a clear language. Around a fourth of global greenhouse gas emissions is caused by food production. In the EU, the farming sector alone accounts for more than 10% of these greenhouse emissions. Unsustainable land management practices in agriculture and forestry contribute significantly to soil degradation. Over 80% of all EU soils are contaminated with residual pesticides. Extensive use of fertilizers cause eutrophication of our soils and water system and harm biodiversity. Soil erosion poses a serious problem, in particular in the Mediterranean member states. EU food imports cause deforestation and increase fertilizer and pesticide use in other countries. The EU is responsible for 16% of deforestation linked to international trade, being the second biggest contributor after China. In addition, we are not only under pressure to reduce the impact that our food production methods have on the environment, but also to adapt our agricultural and food production to the changing climate conditions. Moreover, we need to tackle the problem of food waste and loss during production and at the level of consumption. Besides this environmental consideration, CAP's first goal remains to provide sufficient, healthy, and affordable food to our population and to secure a decent income for farmers. It is clear we need to reconsider the way we produce and consume our food. The EU is the world's biggest exporting power and the third biggest importer of agricultural products. This means that we need to take our responsibility also by considering the international dimension of our food system. So first point, the transformation is necessary. But second point, how? How will we proceed? How do we achieve the transition towards more sustainability? How do we ensure that all actors of the value chain take part in it? The question is whether all relevant stakeholders and decision makers in member states as well as at the EU level share the same ambition, and crucially, whether the EU policy framework is fit for purpose. I will already spoil my conclusion. My answer is no, not yet. We will examine successively the CAP framework and the food and the farm-to-fork strategy. When we speak about food production, we speak about agriculture. The main policy in the EU is the Common Agricultural Policy, which was introduced over 60 years ago. One of the new features of the reform that was agreed last year are the national strategic plans. Their laudable intention is to give more responsibility to member states in the implementation of the CAP. This architecture has, however, been criticized, as the environmental ambitions given to the strategic plan do not seem to match the environmental objective the EU has set out in the European Green Deal and the farm-to-fork and biodiversity strategies. The obvious problem here is that there is no direct link between the European Green Deal and the CAP. In their strategic plans, member states should report on how their national programs align with the objective of the European Green Deal, but this is not mandatory. There is also no legal mechanism for the European Commission to reject a CAP strategic plan if it does not comply with the EU-wide environmental targets for 2030 and 2050. What does this tell us? Although the successive reforms of the CAP have introduced more and more environmental conditionalities, it remains first and foremost a policy aiming at ensuring food production and providing income support to farmers. It is an agriculture policy, not an environmental policy, not a food policy. The CAP remains focused on primary agricultural production. Consumer policy and the regulation of food processing and retail are kept outside its scope. This brings me to the farm-to-fork strategy and the question of whether it provides the necessary political framework towards a sustainable food system. Clearly, this strategy stems from the recognition of the insufficiencies of the current setup and takes a new, more comprehensive perspective namely a food systems perspective. Importantly, it recognizes the inextricable links between healthy people, healthy societies, and a healthy planet. It sets some clear targets, in particular for primary agricultural production. It addresses comprehensively up and downstream sectors, including food processing, wholesale, retail, and hospitality. In other words, this is a step in the right direction. But it cannot be said that the strategy provides the solid legal and political framework for the sustainable food system we need, as it fulfills primarily an agenda-setting function for future legal initiative. Much will depend on how ambitious and consistent the new legal framework will be. And here comes the biggest challenge and the largest unknown area. There is a real risk that the myriad of new legislations, programs, and initiatives that have been announced lack a clear compass to follow to achieve the transformation of the EU food system. Why do I see a risk? Because we need to think holistically and comprehensively for the farm-to-fork strategy to become a success. We need a food system policy that provides a framework, common principles and objectives for relevant sectoral policy. We need a food policy that bridges action at EU level with policies at national level. I am not sure, unfortunately, that we are fully there yet. We need to progress in 4 directions. First, we need to break the political silos and align policies under common objective. We need to define what sustainability of food system means for us. We need to define a common set of principles. These common principles then need to be applied to all policies related to food production and consumption. Second, we need a long-term vision for transformation. Over the course of the past months, my team and I have spoken with various stakeholders, with farmers, food processors, and scientific experts. One clear message from all of them was, politics must provide a concrete vision of where we want to go, but also the right tools to support and spur transformation. Third, we need to integrate all policy levels. We see many individual initiatives as far as farming is concerned, as far as local short supply chain is concerned, many of these initiatives everywhere in Europe. However, it is important to bring these initiatives under a more coherent framework and governance structure in which action at EU level and at member state level complement each other. Finally, we need to ensure a fair distribution of responsibilities along the food value chain. The cost of the transition needs to be distributed fairly. Processing and distribution need to contribute to the decarbonization, and consumers and civil society need to be brought into the debate. This leads me to the conclusion that the question of how member states' policies and ambition can be better aligned with EU action and ambition is not only a question of technicalities, it is first and foremost a question of how well we define and then communicate the objective that we have for our food system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Geneviève. And Geneviève, if you'd like to join me now, and we'll have just a little follow-up in terms of some of the points, the very interesting points that you raised there in your intervention. Let's take a seat. Thank you. Geneviève, I described you there in my introduction, and drawing on your time from your cabinet membership, working very closely with Jacques Delors on environmental and climate action issues way back when he held the mandate for twice during the 80s and 90s. What do you see, and what's your insight in terms of the evolution of this policy, in terms of transforming the food system? You spoke there about Rio 1992, so you've got a little bit of history and a wealth of experience that we can tap into. So I'd just like to hear your insight in terms of the evolution, first of all, how you see that.
1992 is a very important date, not only because of Rio, but because of the first reform, the first tentative to green agriculture in Europe was the so-called Delors-McSharry reform.
My fellow Irishman, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this was the first step. Delors himself was coming from partly at least a rural background, and was very much in the spirit of the objective that were set for the CAP when the European Union was founded. But he evolved, and one of the events that made him more aware of the necessity to protect our environment was Chernobyl. So it was 1986.
That's history repeating
But
itself in a way.
then the preparation of Rio, and I was with him, I started in his cabinet in early 1991. At that time, he had already realized how important it was to protect our natural resources. But he did not see any contradiction between, and this is a thread that he has followed all his life. There is no contradiction between production, ensuring quality food for everybody, decent income for farmers, and protecting our environment. It's just a matter of transforming the way we produce.
And in that sense then, Geneviève, and you mentioned it in your speech, do you think this farm-to-fork strategy that's sort of underpinning the policy going forward, do you think that's going in the right direction, this approach, taking it from the farm to the fork, right from the farmers and producers, right all the way up through the processing chain, the value chain? Do you think that's going in the right direction then?
I think that this approach, this holistic approach, taking the whole value chain into consideration and all the stakeholders, is the right one. However, we are not yet there, and I see two main problems. First of all, I am not sure that this strategy was sufficiently discussed with all the relevant stakeholders. And this is a complaint that we hear notably from the farmers. So they were not part of the setting of the objectives. And I think that this mistake should not be reproduced. You know that Delors was the man of social dialogue, and he was listening to all stakeholders. I must say that it is also something that I very much appreciated when I was with WWF. Our motto was, together, possible. We really need to be all together to set the right objectives and then go together in the right direction.
Sure.
So this was, I think, the first mistake that should be avoided now. Second was that no direct link, no strong link was made between CAP and the farm-to-fork strategy. So these two mistakes have to be corrected if we want to go all together in the right direction.
Sure, and that's a point that we'll be raising in a moment with Achim Irimescu in terms of member state buy-in. But there was just a point that we discussed last night at the speakers' dinner, Geneviève, and I know you wanted to raise the whole issue of Ukraine, the Ukrainian crisis and Russia's invasion there. And of course there's the humanitarian aspect, and we're very cognizant of that today, but there's also, as Stephen said at the outset, that, and Mr. Potocznik, it has shone a light on the current food system and the flaws in our current food system in terms of food sovereignty and food security. Perhaps just your final point on that then, if you don't mind, Geneviève.
I would make 2 points. First of all, we should show solidarity towards the most affected states, especially in our neighborhood, namely Morocco, Lebanon, Egypt, that really are in a very difficult situation due to the cutting of imports from Ukraine, and also because of climate change, and they are confronted to lack of water more and more, aridity. So this is the first duty we have, solidarity toward them. And second, we should try to combine the necessity to replace protein production with the necessity to advance in environmental sustainability. And the priority should be to replace soja imports coming from deforestation.
Mm-hmm. And certainly there's a whole, and the French presidency is putting the protein strategy and our own EU production of protein plants high on the agenda, as is the whole question of food sovereignty. Do you have a final point then? Because just before you leave us, Geneviève, sort of what's your message to the forum today? What's your parting words?
I think I have already delivered it, and I think that everybody here can understand it together. Really together, possible. So please discuss, please share points of view, difficulties, and set common objectives.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Geneviève, for your intervention today. And if you'd like now to join the forum and hopefully take part later on in the afternoon. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.